Vesper 9 did not breathe. It pulsed. Every 23 seconds, the great bells tolled from cathedral spires that clawed at a sky choked with industrial smog. Between each toll, the hymns continued their rhythm, matching the heartbeat of a world that had forgotten silence. In the cathedral district, stone columns rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, their surfaces carved with devotional texts that spiraled upward into darkness. The air tasted of incense and machine oil, a combination that burned the throat and clung to skin. Thousands of voices joined in prayer, their words indistinguishable from one another, merging into a single droning note that vibrated through metal and bone alike. High above the kneeling masses, a choir stood arranged in concentric circles. Their robes hung in tatters' edges, blackened by something other than fire. They did not sing with their mouths alone. The sound emerged from deeper places, pulling at the fabric of reality with each measured syllable. Beneath their feet, runes glowed a dull crimson, pulsing in time with the bells. The lead cantor raised skeletal hands. His voice cut through the drone, sharp and precise. "Lock frequency. Resonance coordinate active." The words meant nothing to the faithful below. They continued their prayers, unaware that the hymn had shifted into something else entirely. A formula. A key. An invitation sent screaming through dimensions that mortal minds were never meant to perceive. In the Imperium, something heard. The tear opened slowly, methodically, like a surgeon's incision through skin. No jagged edges, no explosive rupture. Just a clean wound in the air itself, perfectly calibrated to reach across the gulf between worlds and find a specific resonance. A matching frequency. A scar. Somewhere else, in a world where demons knocked with the sound of breaking glass and unpaid electric bills, the floor of Devil May Cry. Office shuddered. Dust fell from ceiling beams. The neon sign outside flickered twice, then went dark. Dante sat with his boots propped on a desk buried under pizza boxes and gun magazines. The slice in his hand had gone cold an hour ago, but he chewed anyway, eyes half closed in something approaching contentment. The phone sat silent. The streets outside remained mercifully quiet. For once, the world seemed willing to leave him alone. "Not bad," he muttered to no one. "Could get used to this." The floor opened beneath him. No explosion, no warning, just a sensation of being grabbed by the collar and yanked sideways through a tunnel that had no walls, no light, no up or down. His fingers tightened on the sword he carried, out of pure reflex muscle memory, overriding thought. The office dissolved around him, walls and furniture sucking backward into a vortex that had no center. Dante tried to speak, but sound died in his throat. The pull intensified, dragging him through layers of space that folded and twisted like wet paper. He glimpsed things in the darkness between worlds, shapes that might have been eyes, whispers in languages that predated meaning. A cold that went deeper than temperature, settling into his chest like a frozen hand squeezing his heart. Then gravity returned with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He hit stone hard enough to crack it, rolling to absorb the impact, and coming up in a crouch with his blade already drawn. The world spun for half a second before his vision cleared, taking in his surroundings with the practiced eye of someone who had woken up in worse places. A cathedral. Massive. The ceiling lost somewhere in shadow overhead, held up by columns thick enough to hide a car behind. Statues lined the walls, their faces worn smooth by time or deliberately removed, replaced with blank metal masks. The air hung heavy with smoke from sensors that swung on chains. Their rhythm matching the tolling of bells, he could feel more than hear. Bodies littered the floor. Not corpses, not yet. They writhed and moaned, hands clutching at their heads as blood trickled from ears and noses. One man staggered past, eyes rolled back to show only white mouth working soundlessly. His skin rippled like water bones, shifting beneath the surface in ways that bones should not move. Dante straightened slowly, sword still in hand, taking in the nightmare with the expression of someone who had seen this particular show before. Right. His voice cut through the hymn like a knife through fog. Not home. A woman screamed nearby, high and piercing, before the sound twisted into something that resembled laughter more than pain. Her body convulsed back, arching until tendons stood out like cables. When she opened her mouth again, the sound that emerged belonged to something else entirely. Dante's eyes narrowed. He recognized possession when he saw it, but this felt different. Wrong. The usual signatures were absent. No sulfur, no cold spots, no sense of individual entities forcing their way into unwilling hosts. This was more like a broadcast, something transmitted through the air itself, riding on the back of that relentless hymn. He turned slowly, tracking the sound to its source. High above, barely visible through the smoke, and shadow figures moved in synchronized patterns. The choir. Their mouths opened and closed in unison. But the sound came from everywhere at once, amplified and distorted by the architecture, until it became a physical presence pressing down on everything below. Another scream. Closer this time. A young man stumbled backward, clawing at his own face. His features rippled, and reformed jaw elongating into something meant for ripping rather than chewing. Dante moved without thinking, closing the distance in 3 quick steps. His fist connected with the side of the man's head, not hard enough to kill, just enough to drop him like a puppet with cut strings. The thing riding him writhed a shadow with too many angles, trying to maintain its grip. Dante grabbed at his hand, passing through what should have been empty air, but finding purchase on something cold and slick. He yanked hard, ripping it free. The shadow dissolved with a hiss, leaving behind the stink of burnt metal. The young man gasped, eyes focusing for the first time in minutes. He looked up at Dante with an expression caught between terror and desperate hope. "Don't mention it." Dante hauled him upright, shoving him toward the nearest door. "Run, now." The man didn't need to be told twice. Dante turned back to the chaos, assessing the situation with grim efficiency. More people convulsing, more shadows gathering, and that hymn, that cursed rhythmic drone that seemed to be the key to all of it. His gaze traveled along the walls, following thick cables that ran like arteries between stone and metal. Speaker grills, amplification systems. The whole cathedral had been turned into one massive broadcasting station. Cute. He spun his sword, once settling it comfortably in his grip. Someone's playing DJ with prayer. A low growl answered him from the shadows between the columns. Then another, and another. Shapes detached from the darkness, humanoid, but distorted their proportions, all wrong. They moved with jerking puppet-like motions, drawn by the same force that had possessed the civilians, but finding more stable purchase in these corrupted vessels. Dante counted 6, then 10, then stopped counting. His mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Yeah, okay, this is more familiar." The nearest shadow thing lunged bone blade appendages, extending from wrists that bent backward. Dante sidestepped, almost lazy in his precision, and his sword hummed through the air in a clean arc. The creature came apart, dissolving into oily smoke before the pieces hit the ground. Next. They came at him in a rush all at once, drawn by movement and heat, and the simple fact that he stood out like a red coat in a sea of gray robes. Dante moved through them like water through a sieve, every motion economical, every strike placed exactly where it needed to be. No wasted energy, no flourishes, Just clean, efficient violence delivered with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this since before he could vote. A blade scraped across his shoulder, tearing fabric, but not finding skin. He pivoted, elbow driving into where a human face would be, then followed through with a backhand slash that sent the attacker spinning into two of its companions. They tangled, and Dante used the opening to put a bullet through the nearest speaker grill. The hymn stuttered. Just for a moment. Just enough. 3 of the possessed civilians gasped and went still, the shadows releasing them all at once. They collapsed, breathing hard, but alive. Dante's grin widened a fraction. There we go. He moved along the wall, firing precisely into each speaker he could reach. The creatures tried to stop him, but they were learning too slowly. By the time they adapted to his pattern, he had already moved to the next position, boots finding purchase on decorative stonework as he climbed toward the higher installations. The hymn fractured further, its rhythm breaking apart into discordant fragments. More shadows dissolved. More people fell free, gasping like drowning victims dragged from deep water. Somewhere in the cathedral's upper reaches, someone must have noticed. The bells tolled once, sharp and commanding. The hymn shifted notes, climbing higher, reaching for frequencies that made teeth ache and eyes water. The pressure in the air increased, pushing down like a physical weight. Dante dropped back to the ground, landing in a crouch as a fresh wave of shadow things materialized from the corners and alcoves. These moved faster, more coherently, responding to some guiding intelligence rather than blind instinct. He straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders. Blood from a dozen shallow cuts had begun to stain his coat, adding new red to old stains. His breathing remained even, controlled. The sword in his hand caught the dim light from the few remaining candles, gleaming like a promise. All right. His voice carried clearly despite the chaos. Let's see who's conducting this choir. The bells tolled again. The creatures charged, and Dante met them halfway, a red blur cutting through darkness with methodical, almost casual brutality. High above, unseen by those below, the lead cantor smiled. The resonance had succeeded. Something had crossed over. Not what they had summoned, perhaps, but something touched by the right frequencies. Something that killed demons without hesitation. Something that could be shaped, directed, used. The hymn continued, adjusting its rhythm, beginning to weave a new pattern, a new invitation. This time not to summon, but to bind. In the shadows at the cathedral's edges, where smoke and incense met, stone things that were not quite shadows and not quite solid began to take notice of the man in the red coat. They watched him fight with interest that bordered on hunger. They had been waiting for someone like this, someone who could become their angel, their weapon, their saint painted in blood. The bells tolled. The hymn swelled. And Dante, ignorant of the trap being woven around him with every demon he killed, continued fighting his way toward the choir with the grim determination of a man who had walked through hell before and expected to do so again. Vespera 9 pulsed in rhythm with the bells, and in the spaces between, the tolling a name began to spread through the darkness like a virus. Red Angel. Angelus Ruber. The weapon they had been promised was finally here. The hymn crawled through stone like infection through flesh. Dante followed its trail deeper into the cathedral's guts boots, silent on flagstones worn smooth by centuries of penitent feet. Behind him, the main hall still echoed with screams, but fewer now. The possessed either fled or fell. Their puppet strings cut when he destroyed enough broadcast nodes. Ahead, the architecture changed. The grand devotional spaces gave way to functional corridors lined with pipes and cable bundles thick as tree trunks. Steam hissed from joints where metal met stone. The air grew warmer, denser, carrying the metallic bite of overworked machinery, mixed with something organic. Sweat and blood and fear concentrated into an atmosphere that stuck to the back of the throat. A sound reached him from the passage ahead. Not quite human. Too wet, too rhythmic, like lungs working overtime to process air they were never meant to breathe. Dante slowed, sword held low and ready. The corridor opened into what might have been a chapel once before someone gutted it and rebuilt the interior into something between a theater and an abattoir. Rows of stone benches faced a raised platform. On that platform, suspended by cables and prayer, hung the source of the breathing. The creature had been human. Parts of it still were. A torso, arms, legs, all present and accounted for in the technical sense. But the head had split open like a flower petals of bone and flesh, spreading wide to reveal the throat beneath grotesquely enlarged into a living resonance chamber. Cables fed into its spine. Its chest heaved in metronomic rhythm, each breath releasing a note that harmonized with the cathedral's ongoing hymn. Around its base, lesser figures knelt in genuflection. Their robes marked them as choir members, but their movements carried the jerking quality of damaged machinery. They swayed in time with the thing's breathing mouths, opening and closing, without producing sound, letting the broadcast flow through them like water through broken pipes. One of the kneeling figures turned its head too far, neck rotating in a way that suggested missing vertebrae. Empty eyes found Dante. The mouth opened, but the voice that emerged belonged to the breathing thing above. Prayer, kill, prayer, kill. Dante tilted his head slightly. That's your only setting. The kneeling figures rose as one movement synchronized perfectly despite their individual damages. They formed a semicircle blocking the exits, while the breathing thing's next exhalation carried a different tone. Higher, sharper. A command rather than a mantra. The air pressure dropped. Dante's ears popped. Then the choir beast's throat began to glow from within crimson light pulsing in time with its distended heartbeat. Cute trick, Dante said, and opened fire. His shots punched through the cables, feeding into the creature's spine. Sparks erupted where metal met meat. The thing's breathing hitched rhythm breaking, and for a moment the oppressive weight of the broadcast lifted. The kneeling figures stumbled, their coordinated movements dissolving into individual confusion. The choir beast screamed. Not with its mouth, but with its entire body, sound erupting from the throat cavity in a wave that hit like a physical blow. Stone cracked. The nearest bench exploded into fragments. Dante staggered back 2 steps, raising an arm to shield his face from flying debris. When the wave passed, the kneeling figures had changed. Their confusion burned away, replaced by something closer to hunger. They lunged hands, extended fingers, bent into claws. Dante moved through them like smoke, never quite where they expected him to be. A pivot here, a duck there, each motion flowing into the next with practiced efficiency. He didn't kill them. Couldn't. They were still people underneath, just running on someone else's signal. Instead, he broke what needed breaking. Knees, elbows, the occasional jaw when they got too close. They dropped one after another until the floor around him looked like the aftermath of a particularly violent prayer meeting. The choir beast pulled against its cables, trying to angle its throat cavity toward him for another scream. Dante didn't give it the chance. He vaulted onto the nearest bench, then used it as a springboard to reach the platform. His blade found one of the thick cables anchoring the thing in place and severed it cleanly. The creature lurched sideways off balance, its breathing turning ragged. The remaining cables groaned under the shifted weight. Dante landed in a roll, came up running, and cut through 2 more supports before the thing could compensate. It collapsed, hitting the platform hard enough to crack stone, its throat cavity gasping, like a beached fish. For a moment's silence. Then a wet, choking laugh bubbled up from somewhere in the ruined mass of flesh. "Frequency maintained," it rasped. "Signal continues. You stop nothing." Dante approached slowly, studying the wreckage. The creature's eyes, tiny and human, and filled with something that might have been relief, tracked his movement. "Yeah." He crouched, bringing himself level with what remained of the thing's face. "Where's it coming from?" The eyes focused on him with sudden clarity. Behind the madness and the pain, intelligence flickered. A person buried deep, seizing a moment of control. "Everywhere." The word came out, broken syllables fighting through damaged vocal cords. "Node network. Resonance coordinate locked. Broadcasting on loop. How do I shut it down?" The eyes began to lose focus again, the broadcast reasserting control. The mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before forcing out 2 more words. "Cut. Choir." Then the light went out, and whatever had briefly been human dissolved back into the meat and machinery that had consumed it. Dante stood rolling his shoulders. His coat hung heavier now, soaked with blood and whatever else passed for lubricant in this nightmare. The hymn continued unchanged, though he'd eliminated its most obvious source. Which meant the dying thing had been right. This wasn't one transmitter. It was a network. A sound echoed from deeper in the complex. Not breathing this time. Footsteps, heavy, measured. Multiple sets moving in formation. Dante turned toward the sound, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the anticipation of violence. Finally, someone who might actually fight back. The first armored figure rounded the corner at the far end of the corridor. Then another. Then 6 more behind them. They moved like soldiers' weapons, raised covering angles with professional precision. Their armor gleamed dull black in the dim light, marked with symbols that meant nothing to Dante, but probably meant everything to whoever sent them. The lead figure raised a gauntleted fist. The formation stopped as one. "Target acquired," a voice rumbled through external speakers. "Anomalous entity. Demonic signature confirmed." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Demonic. That's a little judgmental. We just met. Resistance inadvisable." The speaker stepped forward, revealing bulk that suggested gene-crafted muscle beneath the armor plating. "Surrender for interrogation or face termination." "See, here's my problem with that." Dante let his sword rest casually across one shoulder. "I don't really do the whole interrogation thing. Makes me twitchy." The armored figures didn't respond. Their weapons remained trained on him, unwavering, while more footsteps approached from behind. He was being boxed in. Textbook tactical encirclement. A new voice cut through the standoff, sharp and cold, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Restrain fire." A woman stepped into view, flanked by 2 smaller figures in robes. Her black coat swept the floor as she walked, and her face held the expression of someone who had ordered executions before breakfast and considered it routine. At her shoulder, a metal skull drifted, its eye sockets glowing with scanner light. She stopped 3 meters from Dante and subjected him to a scrutiny that felt like being filleted. "Identify yourself," she said. Not a request. Dante met her gaze without flinching. "I'm the guy who just cleared your cathedral of whatever was making people's heads explode. You're welcome, by the way. You are contaminated." The skull thing drifted closer, emitting a soft clicking. Warp-adjacent biology. Demonic heritage confirmed. Half demonic, Dante corrected. I like to think the human half balances things out. The woman's expression didn't change. There is no balance with corruption, only degrees of damnation. One of the robed figures, the one with skin pale enough to be translucent and eyes that had filmed over white, swayed slightly. Its mouth moved words emerging in a monotone. He kills demons. The taint flows backward, away from him, not through him. The woman glanced at the speaker, then back to Dante. Something shifted in her posture. Not relaxation, recalculation. You claim to hunt demons. I don't claim anything. It's just what I do. Then you will do it for the Imperium. She gestured sharply, and the armored figures lowered their weapons fractionally. Temporarily, under supervision. Dante laughed short and sharp. Lady, I don't work for free, and I definitely don't work supervised. You work or you burn. Her voice carried no emotion whatsoever. Those are your options. The standoff stretched. Dante could feel the tension coiling tighter, weapons ready to discharge at the slightest provocation. He'd been in worse spots. Not many, but a few. The math was simple. Fight now, win, maybe definitely get the cathedral leveled on top of whoever couldn't escape in time. Or play along until he understood what fresh hell he'd landed in. His shoulders dropped a fraction. Not surrender. Just the acknowledgement that violence could wait. All right. Temporary. But I've got conditions. The woman waited silent. 1. He held up a finger. No killing civilians. I see you torch someone who can't fight back, we're done. The Imperium does not negotiate terms with abominations. 2. He ignored her, adding another finger. You want demons dead? Point me at them. But I choose how. No leash. No remote control. The skull drifted between them, clicking faster. The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Acceptable. Temporarily. She turned to the armored soldiers. Secure the immediate area. Maintain visual contact with the entity at all times. Entity has a name, Dante said. It's Dante. Try using it sometime. Makes things friendlier. She looked back at him with eyes like gun barrels. There is no friendship in service to the Emperor. Only duty and death. Sounds like a great workplace. She didn't dignify that with a response, instead gesturing to one of her robed attendants. A woman younger than the pale-eyed one, carrying what looked like prayer beads and data slates in equal measure. The attendant stepped forward, nervous but determined. This is Sister Dialogus Lys, the woman in black said. She decodes the hymn. You will assist her in locating the primary transmission nodes. Lys nodded quickly, clutching her equipment. The broadcast operates on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Each node reinforces the others. We need to map the pattern before we can disrupt it effectively. Dante studied her for a moment. Unlike the cold-eyed commander, this one actually seemed to care about solving problems rather than just executing solutions. Sure. Where do we start? The sub-levels. Lys pulled up a schematic on one of her slate's fingers, moving quickly across the display. The infrastructure maps show cable runs leading down to the foundation systems. If the choir is the voice, the basement is the lungs. Great. I love basements. Dante started toward the indicated corridor, then paused. Hey, Commander Ice. You got a name, or do I just keep making up titles? The woman's expression could have etched glass. Inquisitor Varn, Ordo Malleus. She stepped closer, voice dropping to just above a whisper. "And understand this, Dante. I will use you because you are useful. But the moment you become a liability, I will end you without hesitation or regret." Dante smiled, all teeth. "Get in line." He walked past her, following Lys toward the descending stairwell. Behind them, the hymn continued its relentless pulse, and somewhere in the depths below, the true source of the broadcast waited patient as cancer, singing its corruption into the bones of Vespera 9. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, each step worn concave by generations of footfalls. The walls pressed closer the deeper they went, until Dante could touch both sides with outstretched arms. Condensation slicked the stone, making each footfall require conscious attention. Behind him, Lys kept pace with surprising agility for someone carrying half her weight in books and equipment. Further back, the armored soldiers clumped and scraped, their bulk poorly suited to the confined space. Varn walked directly behind Dante, close enough that he could hear the whisper of her breathing. She hadn't holstered her weapon. Neither had her escorts. "This choir," Dante said, breaking the silence. "How long's it been broadcasting?" Lys answered from behind, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow passage. 3 days. Started as normal devotional hymns. Then the pattern shifted. By the second day, people in the outer districts began showing symptoms. Symptoms. Dante navigated around a place where the stairs had crumbled, leaving a gap that required stepping down harder than expected. "That what you call possession? We call it resonance sickness." Lys stumbled slightly on the same gap. "The body tries to harmonize with the broadcast frequency. Most die. Some transform into those things upstairs. The choir beasts are the successful transformations." Her tone suggested success was a relative term. The failures simply hemorrhage until their organs liquefy. Dante glanced back. Lys's face showed clinical detachment, the expression of someone who had cataloged horrors until they became data points. "You seem pretty calm about that." "Panic serves no function." She adjusted her grip on the data slates. "Fear is acceptable. Terror is wasteful." One of Varn's soldiers snorted, quickly suppressed. The Inquisitor herself remained silent, but Dante felt her attention like a blade against his neck. The stairs ended at a landing that opened into a corridor wider than those above. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some as thick as Dante's torso, others thin as fingers. The hymn grew louder here, no longer muffled by stone and distance. It vibrated through the metal pipes, turning them into tuning forks that broadcast into the infrastructure. Lys moved to the nearest pipe cluster and pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a stethoscope and a weapon. She pressed it against the metal, frowning at whatever readout it provided. "Signal strength increasing. We're getting close to a primary node." Dante studied the pipes, following their roots with his eyes. They branched and converged in patterns that suggested deliberate design rather than practical plumbing. Someone had rebuilt this section to amplify the broadcast, turning maintenance tunnels into an instrument. How many nodes in the network? Unknown. Lys moved to the next cluster, repeating her measurement. "We've identified 17 secondary broadcasters, but the primary source..." She shook her head. "It could be anywhere in the Underhive. These tunnels run for kilometers." "Then we map as we go." Dante started down the corridor, following the pipes toward where they converged most densely. Varn's voice cut through the gloom. "Stop!" He stopped. Turned. She stood with her weapon raised, not quite aimed at him, but close enough to matter. "We establish protocols now," she said, before proceeding further. Dante raised an eyebrow. "Bit late for that, isn't it?" You demonstrated capability upstairs. That buys temporary tolerance. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard. It does not buy trust. I'm devastated. Her expression didn't shift. You will follow orders. You will not engage targets without authorization. You will submit to monitoring. She gestured, and the pale-eyed, robed figure stepped forward, swaying slightly. Psyker Cole will maintain psychic observation. Any sign of corruption, any wavering in your pattern, and you will be terminated immediately. The Psyker's milky eyes found Dante despite their apparent blindness. When it spoke, the voice came from somewhere other than its throat. Warp adjacent. Demonic essence integrated, but contained. The corruption flows backward toward him, consumed rather than propagated. Varn absorbed this without visible reaction. Can you maintain surveillance? Yes. But he will know I am watching. That's the point. Varn's attention returned to Dante. Do you understand the terms? Dante looked at the Psyker, then at Liz, who had stopped her measurements to watch the confrontation. The soldiers had spread out slightly, creating crossfire positions. Professional, efficient, absolutely ready to execute him if their commander gave the word. He'd dealt with handlers before, usually by ignoring them. Here's my counteroffer. He took a step toward Varn, watching several soldiers tense. You want the nodes destroyed. I destroy them. But when we find civilians, trapped people, anyone still alive down here, I get them out. No acceptable losses. No necessary sacrifices. We save who we can. Impossible. Varn's tone carried the finality of stone. Contaminated subjects must be purged. Anything less risks infection spreading. Then we're done. Dante turned back toward the corridor. Find someone else to clear your haunted basement. You cannot leave. The click of weapons being raised punctuated her words. You are a heretical entity on Imperial soil. Attempting to flee constitutes... I'm not fleeing. Dante didn't look back. I'm just not working for someone who shoots survivors because it's easier than helping them. The silence stretched. Dante counted 3 seconds. 4, 5. If, Varn said the word carefully measured, the civilians show no signs of possession or mutation, they may be quarantined for observation. Dante stopped walking. Quarantine, not execution. Quarantine, she paused, though many may not survive the screening process. Some chance beats no chance. He turned to face her again. We understand each other. Varn's jaw worked, grinding something between her teeth. A decision. A compromise. Something that clearly tasted like poison. You will mark contaminated subjects for assessment rather than immediate termination. I will assign Medici personnel to screening, but... Her weapon rose fractionally. At the first sign of active possession, of transformation, of corruption spreading, you will step aside and let my soldiers do what is necessary. Dante considered this. It wasn't much. In any reasonable world, it would be nothing. But this clearly wasn't a reasonable world, and the woman in front of him looked like she'd rather shoot him than negotiate. The fact that she was negotiating at all meant something. Deal. Temporarily. She lowered her weapon, not holstering it, just lowering. Sister Liz, continue tracking the signal. Varn gestured to her soldiers. Epsilon formation. Maintain firing lanes. Cole full surveillance. They moved deeper into the tunnels, following the pipes as they grew thicker and more numerous. The air developed a taste something between copper and char. The temperature climbed, despite the depth, as if they descended toward a furnace rather than a basement. Dante heard it before he saw it. A wet, rhythmic sound, like lungs working through fluid. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and there it waited. This choir beast was larger than the one upstairs, its body fused to the wall and floor by cables that had grown into flesh, or flesh that had calcified into cable. The throat cavity pulsed with sickly light, and around its base a dozen figures knelt in various stages of transformation. Some still looked human, skin rippling as bones rearranged beneath. Others had progressed further, faces splitting to accommodate new organs. One of them turned toward the entrance. Its eyes still held intelligence, recognition. Help. The word came out distorted, gargled through a throat that was reshaping itself. Please, can't stop. Varn raised her weapon. Contaminated. Terminate immediately. Dante stepped in front of her barrel. Wait. Move aside. Give me 30 seconds. These are lost. Every moment they remain alive spreads the infection. 30 seconds. Dante didn't look at her, keeping his attention on the transforming people. Liz, can you interrupt the signal just for half a minute? Liz pulled out her equipment hands, moving quickly across controls. Maybe. If I overload the local frequency with counter-harmonic... Try. She bit her lip, calculating. It might kill them anyway. The shock of disconnection. Better than dying slowly while praying. Dante drew his sword. Do it. Liz looked to Varn. The Inquisitor stared at Dante for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. Then she nodded once, sharp as a guillotine blade. Liz pressed a sequence on her device. The air pressure changed to sensation, like ears popping during descent. The hymn stuttered, fractured, then collapsed into silence. The transforming figures convulsed. One screamed a sound of pure animal agony. Another went rigid, back arching, until spine cracked audibly. The one who had begged for help simply fell forward, blood streaming from ears and nose. But 3 of them stopped changing. Their skin settled back into human configuration. Their faces returned to faces, instead of splitting flowers of bone and meat. They looked up at Dante with expressions caught between gratitude and horror. Can you walk? He asked. One nodded weakly. The others didn't respond, too shocked or traumatized to process the question. Epsilon 3, Epsilon 7. Varn's voice carried command like a weapon. Secure the survivors. Restraints, chemical sedation if they resist. 2 soldiers moved forward with surprising gentleness, producing bindings and injectors from belt pouches. The survivors didn't fight. They seemed grateful just to be touched by something human. Dante turned his attention to the choir beast. It had stopped broadcasting, but it still lived, chest heaving, as it struggled to draw breath through a throat designed for resonance rather than respiration. The remaining transforming figures around its base had gone still, dead or dying from the sudden signal loss. This one's the node, Dante asked. One of them. Lee studied her readings. But destroying it will alert the network. They'll know we're hunting the system. Good. Dante raised his sword. Let them know. He drove the blade into the mass of flesh and cable at the beast's core. It shuddered once violently, then collapsed into itself like a deflating balloon. Dark fluid poured from ruptures in its skin, pooling on the floor. The pipes overhead went silent. The hymn's resonance faded from the metal, leaving only the drip of condensation and the ragged breathing of survivors. Varn watched all of this with an expression carved from ice. When the beast finished dying, she spoke quietly. You bought those 3 a few more hours of life. Maybe days if they're fortunate. But the corruption is already in them. The screening will find it. And then they will die anyway. Dante cleaned his blade on a relatively unstained section of his coat. Maybe, or maybe they'll live. Stranger things have happened. Not in the Imperium. Then the Imperium's got a limited imagination. He sheathed his sword. Where's the next node? Lise consulted her equipment face, illuminated by pale screen light. The signal's adapting, routing around the dead node. But I can trace the reroute. There. She pointed to a corridor branching off the main chamber. Southeast deeper, possibly into the industrial substructure. Varn issued orders, soldiers moving to form up. The 3 survivors were being escorted back the way they'd come, sedated but alive. One of them met Dante's eyes as they passed, mouthing something that might have been thanks. As the group prepared to move on, Psyker Cole drifted closer to Dante. The milky eyes focused on him with uncomfortable precision. "You consume corruption," it whispered. "But consumption implies appetite. What happens when there's too much to swallow?" Dante looked at the Psyker, at Varn standing nearby listening, at Lys gathering her equipment with the careful movements of someone trying not to draw attention. "Guess we'll find out," he said. They descended further into Vespera 9's guts, following the hymn as it wound through pipe and stone. Behind them, 3 survivors breathed sedated air and dreamed dreams that might be their last. Ahead, the broadcast waited patient as plague singing its corruption into the bones of a world that had learned to mistake faith for inevitability. And somewhere in those depths, something that had been watching Dante kill demons began to understand what he could become. Not a weapon, not a savior, something useful, something that could be fed the right frequencies until he resonated exactly as intended. The hymn adapted its pattern, weaving new harmonics into old verses. An invitation specifically tailored for someone who walked between damnation and redemption. Someone wearing a red coat in a world that had forgotten what color meant beyond blood and rust. The bells of Vespera 9 tolled the hour, and in the spaces between the sound, a name began to take shape. Not his name. The name they would give him when the transformation completed. Angelus Ruber, the Red Angel. Their saint of slaughter painted in the blood of demons he killed without ever realizing he was feeding their design. The industrial substructure smelled like every factory Dante had ever fought through. Hot metal and chemical residue ozone from arc welders. The particular staleness of air that had been recycled too many times through filters, clogged with decades of particulate. The corridors here were wider, built to accommodate machinery rather than people. Overhead conveyors ran on rails bolted to the ceiling, their chains silent and still. Power had been cut to this section maybe years ago. Lys consulted her equipment, comparing readings against architectural schematics that flickered across her smallest data slate. The larger ones she'd distributed among Varn's soldiers, turning them into mobile sensor arrays. "The signal's fragmenting," she said. "Multiple sources now. The network is compensating for our interference." Dante paused at a junction where 3 corridors met. Each looked identical, stretching into shadow, broken only by emergency lighting that pulsed red every 30 seconds. "Which way concentrates the most nodes?" "Southeast." She pointed down the rightmost passage. "But there's something else. Heat signature. Consistent with active machinery." Varn moved up beside them, weapon still ready despite hours of walking. The woman didn't seem to tire, which suggested either excellent conditioning or augmentation Dante couldn't see. "Define active," she said. "Powered systems, running at capacity." Lys zoomed her schematic. This section was decommissioned 8 years ago. Nothing should be drawing power. Someone squatting. Dante started down the southeast corridor, using the abandoned infrastructure for their own purposes. The cult, Varn's tone suggested this confirmed suspicions rather than surprising her. They've established production facilities. Producing what? Whatever serves their masters. The corridor opened into a gallery overlooking a fabrication floor 3 stories below. Dante stopped at the railing, looking down at machinery that definitely shouldn't be operational. Assembly lines moved with rhythmic precision, their conveyor belts carrying components through various stations. Arc welders sparked in synchronized patterns. Robotic arms fitted pieces together with mechanical patience. And at each station, figures in ragged robes performed tasks with the blank efficiency of sleepwalkers. Their movements synchronized not through training, but through something else. Something broadcasting through their nervous systems. "They're making speakers," Lise whispered, horror creeping into her clinical tone. "Broadcast amplifiers. The network is building more nodes." Dante studied the production line. Each completed amplifier was crude, assembled from salvaged parts and improvised materials. But crude didn't mean ineffective. He counted 12 units finished and waiting for deployment. Another 18 in various stages of assembly. "How long to map the whole network?" he asked. Lise pulled her attention from the factory floor. "Unknown. If they're manufacturing new nodes faster than we destroy existing ones, then we're chasing our tails." Dante scanned the gallery for access points. "We need to cut the head off this thing. The source transmission." Varn lowered her weapon, fractionally calculating. "Destroy that the network collapses." "Where is it?" "Unknown." Lise consulted multiple data slates simultaneously. "The broadcast originates from a central point, but the signal's been routed through so many relays I can't isolate." A new voice interrupted, crackling slightly with mechanical distortion. "Lower Underhive, Sector 17 Gamma, Geothermal Plant Subsection." Everyone turned. A figure stood in the corridor behind them, having approached with surprising stealth for someone wearing red robes and carrying enough equipment to outfit a workshop. Half their face was obscured by a breathing apparatus connected to tubes that ran into their collar. One eye was organic, the other a lens assembly that clicked and refocused as it studied the group. Varn's weapon came up. "Identify." "Tech Adept, Row 7. The figure's organic eye flicked to the soldiers, then back to Varn. "Attached to Survey Division Mechanicus Explorator Fleet Sigma. Currently detached." "Explain detached." The Tech Adept's mechanical eye rotated, a gesture that might have been equivalent to rolling eyes. "My superiors disagreed with my assessment that the hymn broadcasts represented technological heresy rather than theological innovation. I was reassigned to maintenance duties. I reassigned myself to investigation." Lise stepped forward, recognition lighting her features. "Row 7. You published the treatise on harmonic corruption in machine spirits." "Sister Dialogus, Lise." The Tech Adept inclined their head. "Your work on canticle deconstruction was excellent, particularly the section on multi-frequency parsing. Focus." Varn's weapon remained trained on Row 7. "How do you know the source location?" "I've been tracking the network for 3 days, mapping signal propagation patterns. The relays are sophisticated, but they maintain a hierarchical structure. All roads lead to Sector 17 Gamma." The Tech Adept pulled a data slate from their robes, its screen displaying a complex web of connections. "The geothermal plant provides power and acoustic resonance chambers, ideal for a primary broadcaster." Dante studied the Tech Adept, noting the slight tremor in their organic hand and the way they stood just outside of easy striking distance. Someone used to being threatened. "You've been investigating alone," he said. "Correct." The Mechanicus considers independent research problematic, especially research that questions approved doctrine. And you just happened to find us. The mechanical eye focused on Dante with uncomfortable precision. I found her. A nod toward Lys. You're the anomaly. The one killing choir beasts with remarkable efficiency. Varn moved between them. Tech adept. Your assistance could prove valuable, but understand that any betrayal will result in immediate termination. Understood, Inquisitor. Row 7's tone suggested this was less than surprising. I have no intention of betraying those fighting the same corruption I've been documenting. The Inquisitor studied the tech adept for a long moment before holstering her weapon. Show us the route. Row 7 projected a holographic map from their data slate, the image flickering in the dim light. The path to Sector 17 Gamma wound through maintenance tunnels and abandoned processing centers, avoiding main thoroughfares where cult presence would be concentrated. Estimated travel time, Varn asked. 4 hours at standard pace, less if you're willing to risk instability in the lower sections. Parts of the Underhive are held together more by prayer than engineering at this point. We move carefully. Varn signaled her soldiers. Formation Beta. Row 7 takes point with Sister Lys. I want continuous monitoring for acoustic anomalies. As the group reorganized, Dante caught Lys and Row 7 conferring in low tones, passing data slates back and forth, while exchanging what sounded like technical jargon mixed with theological terms. Two specialists finding common ground in their shared understanding of the nightmare they faced. The descent continued. The architecture grew older, transitioning from industrial functionality to something more ancient. Sections where the walls showed hand-carved marks instead of machine precision. Chambers whose purposes had been forgotten, repurposed multiple times over centuries until their original function became archaeology rather than engineering. They passed through a gallery where statues stood in alcoves, their features worn smooth by time and moisture. Psyker Cole drifted closer to Dante as they navigated between the monuments. You feel it, the Psyker whispered. The depth, the age. This world has been dying for so long, it has forgotten what life tasted like. Dante didn't respond. The Psyker was right, but acknowledging it felt like accepting something he didn't want to accept. That some places were too far gone to save. That survival could be so desperate it became indistinguishable from slow extinction. Ahead, Row 7 stopped at an intersection, mechanical eye clicking through multiple spectrums. Heat bloom ahead. Active machinery, possibly another production facility. Varn raised a fist, halting the formation. Scout configuration. Epsilon 2, Epsilon 5. Advance and assess. Two soldiers moved forward with practiced stealth, disappearing around the corner. 30 seconds passed. 45. Then the distinctive crack of weapons fire echoed through the corridor, followed by screaming. Not human screaming. Something else. Dante was moving before Varn could issue orders, sword already in hand. He rounded the corner to find the two soldiers pinned down behind a rusted conveyor, returning fire against shapes that moved through the shadows with unsettling coordination. These weren't possessed civilians or choir beasts. These were something purpose-built, humanoid frames wrapped in cable and metal, their chests hollowed out to accommodate speaker arrays that broadcasted volumes that turned sound into weaponry. They moved in sync, each step coordinated with the others, creating interference patterns that made the air itself feel thick and resistant. One of the soldiers went down, blood streaming from ruptured eardrums. The other kept firing, but their shots were going wide, aim disrupted by the acoustic assault. Dante assessed the situation in the half-second it took to cover the distance. 6 targets. Networked coordination. Speaker arrays vulnerable but protected by the bodies built around them. Standard tactics wouldn't work, because standard tactics required being able to aim properly, while your inner ear was being liquefied. He went low instead of high, sliding under the first construct's reaching arms, and driving his sword upward through the speaker array. The thing's coordination immediately deteriorated, movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. He rolled clear, came up behind the second, and put 2 shots through the cables connecting its limbs. The remaining 4 adapted, spreading out to avoid giving him easy targets. Their broadcasts shifted frequency, trying to find the resonance that would incapacitate him like it had the soldier. But Dante had fought in worse conditions. Hell had acoustics that could peel sanity like fruit skin. This was just noise. He dismantled them methodically, targeting joints and cables, turning coordinated threat into salvage. When the last one fell, silence rushed back in with almost physical relief. Varn appeared in the corridor, assessing the scene with cold efficiency. Casualties. 1 injured. Dante helped the soldier with the bleeding ears to their feet. Needs medical attention. Epsilon 6 will escort him back to the surface. Varn gestured and another soldier moved to support their wounded companion. We continue. They knew we were coming, Lise said, examining one of the fallen constructs. These were positioned as guards, not workers. Row 7 knelt beside the nearest corpse, mechanical eye scanning. Modified servitors, lobotomized humans retrofitted with broadcast equipment. The surgery is crude but effective. People. Dante looked at the 6 bodies, seeing them differently now. You turned people into speakers. I didn't. Row 7's organic eye found his. The cult did. Cult. This is what they do with those who resist conversion. Make them serve the network anyway. Dante felt something cold settle in his chest, not anger. Anger was hot immediate. This was colder, the kind of cold that lasted. How far to the geothermal plant? 2 hours, Row 7 said. But there will be more of these. The closer we get to the source, the heavier the defenses. Good. Dante started walking. Let them come. Behind him, Varn and Lys exchanged glances. The tech adept's mechanical eye tracked Dante's movement with what might have been concern or calculation. Psyker Cole drifted alongside the Inquisitor. He consumed the corruption of the choir beasts, it whispered. But this has no corruption to consume, only cruelty. And cruelty cannot be eaten, only answered. Varn watched Dante's retreating back, then nodded to her remaining soldiers. Formation Beta, double time, and prepare for engagement. They descended further, following Row 7's map through passages that grew narrower and hotter. The air carried the sulfur smell of geothermal vents mixed with ozone and burned insulation. Somewhere ahead, machinery hummed with the patient rhythm of something that had been running for a very long time. The source was close, and whatever waited there had been building toward this moment since the hymn first started singing. Since Dante first fell through the tear in reality and landed exactly where he needed to be. Not an accident. Not a random pull through the void. A summons. An invitation written in frequencies only someone touched by damnation could hear. They were walking into a trap designed specifically for a demon hunter who couldn't stop hunting demons. And Dante, for all his experience and skill and hard-won wisdom, was doing exactly what the trap wanted him to do. Walking forward. Killing everything in his path, becoming exactly the weapon they needed. The hymn echoed through the pipes overhead, adjusting its pattern 1 note at a time. Learning, adapting, weaving Dante's presence into its composition like a new instrument joining an orchestra. Soon it would be time for the crescendo. Soon the Red Angel would be complete. Soon Vespera 9 would have its Saint of Slaughter. And the Imperium would have one more thing to fear in the darkness. Ki-yi-ti-yi. The geothermal vents announced themselves through temperature first, then sound. Heat pressed against exposed skin, like standing too close to an oven. The air shimmered, distorting vision at the edges. And beneath the constant background hum of the hymn came a deeper rhythm, the groan of machinery working under loads it was never designed to bear. Row 7 halted at a junction where 3 corridors converged around a central column carved with maintenance codes worn illegible by time. The tech adept's mechanical eye clicked through spectrums, reading heat signatures invisible to organic vision. Primary conduit ahead. Acoustic resonance suggests large open chamber. The organic eye found Varn. And biological presence. Multiple signatures. Non-combative movement patterns. Dante moved to the front of the formation. How many? Difficult to determine. Heat bloom from geothermal systems interferes with precise readings. Minimum 20, possibly more. They advanced with weapons ready, following the corridor as it sloped downward. The walls transitioned from stone to metal panels, stamped with imperial eagles and production codes. This section had been industrial once, before someone repurposed it for worse applications. The corridor opened into a gallery overlooking a chamber that had been carved from living rock and reinforced with steel girders. What it contained made Dante stop moving. Below, arranged in rows like an assembly line, children sat strapped into metal chairs. Each chair was connected to a complex web of cables that ran overhead to converge at a central broadcasting array. The cables pierced skin at the base of each child's skull at their temples, sometimes at their throats. Their eyes remained open but empty, staring at nothing, while their mouths moved in silent synchronization. They were breathing, living. Their chests rose and fell with mechanical regularity. But whatever made them people had been carved out and replaced with circuitry. Robed figures moved between the chairs, checking connections, making adjustments. One child convulsed slightly, and a robed technician immediately moved to their chair, tightening restraints and adjusting a dial on the equipment cluster. The child went still. Behind Dante, someone whispered a prayer. One of Varn's soldiers' voice breaking halfway through the invocation to the Emperor. Lisa's data slate slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the gallery floor. Row 7's mechanical eye focused on the broadcasting array, recording details with a detachment of documentation. The organic eye, however, had closed. Dante's hands tightened on his sword, not with the heat of anger, with something colder, something that felt like frost forming in his chest, spreading outward until his fingers went numb. Varn stepped up beside him, surveying the chamber with her executioner's gaze. Contaminated. All of them. The corruption has integrated with their neural pathways. Extraction would be... Don't. Dante's voice came out flat, empty. Don't say another word. She looked at him, really looked, seeing something in his face that made her hand move toward her weapon. This is what I warned you about. The Imperium makes hard choices because I said don't. He started walking toward the stairs leading down to the chamber floor. Stop! Varn's weapon came up. That's an order. Dante kept walking. I will shoot. He didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her, just ascended the stairs with steps that made no sound despite the weight behind them. Psyker Cole drifted forward, milky eyes tracking Dante's movement. He is not possessed, the Psyker whispered. He is not corrupted. But something has changed. The consumption has reversed. Now, he hungers. Varn lowered her weapon fractionally, not holstering it, not trusting, just recalculating. All units, combat readiness. Do not fire unless I command. Below, the robed technicians had noticed the intrusion. One reached for an alarm. Dante covered the distance in a movement too fast to track properly, his hand closing around the technician's wrist before the alarm could be triggered. He twisted breaking bones with clinical precision, then drove his elbow into the cultist's throat. The technician went down without making a sound beyond the wet crunch of cartilage. The others turned, reaching for weapons or prepared spells. Dante was already moving through them, like a scalpel through diseased tissue. Each strike was placed, measured, designed to end threats with the minimum motion required. One cultist managed to raise a malformed pistol. Dante's blade removed the hand holding it, then continued through the cultist's chest in the same fluid arc. Another attempted to flee toward the broadcasting array. Dante caught them, spun them around, and drove his sword through their spine at the exact point that would sever nerve clusters without damaging the equipment they'd been reaching for. No banter, no quips, no style. Just killing reduced to its most efficient form. Within 30 seconds, the robed figures lay scattered across the chamber floor. Dante stood among them, breathing normally, his coat dripping with blood that wasn't his. Above, Varn watched this with the expression of someone seeing their assumptions rearranged. "Sister Liz," she said quietly, "can the children be disconnected safely?" Liz had retrieved her data slate with shaking hands. I don't know. The neural integration is extensive. Removing the connections could cause massive trauma, brain death. Then we sedate them and transport them to medical facilities where proper extraction can be attempted. Dante looked up at the gallery, meeting Varn's eyes. Something in his gaze made her stiffen. "You're going to help them," he said. "Not a question. I am going to follow the most pragmatic course that offers them the highest survival probability." "Good." He turned to the nearest child, a girl who couldn't have been older than 10. Her eyes tracked nothing but her chest continued its rhythmic breathing. Dante knelt beside her chair, studying the cable connections with the focused attention of someone memorizing a target. Row 7 descended the stairs, moving to join him. "The connections are intricate," the tech adept said, "but not irreversible. The cult has some technical skill, but they prioritize function over safety. There are access points here, here, and here." Mechanical fingers indicated specific junction points. "If we deactivate the broadcast first, then systematically disconnect in reverse order of integration, we can minimize neural damage." "How long?" "For all of them, hours. And we would need sedatives to prevent shock response during disconnection." "Then we get sedatives." Dante stood looking up at the gallery. "And we hold this position until every one of these kids is free." Varn's jaw tightened. "That is not tactically sound. We are deep in enemy territory. The cult will respond with overwhelming force." "Let them come." The Inquisitor stared at him for a long moment. Calculation warred with something else in her expression. Finally, she made her decision. Epsilon 4. Return to the surface. Requisition medici personnel and sedatives sufficient for 25 subjects. Tell them inquisitorial authority priority absolute. She paused. "And bring reinforcements, heavy weapons. We are going to hold this position." The soldiers saluted and departed at a run. Liz descended the stairs more slowly, still staring at the children with an expression caught between horror and determination. "I can help," she said. "I understand the harmonic frequencies they're using for neural integration. If we can create a dampening field, do it." Dante moved to check the chamber's other entrances. 3 corridor access points, plus the main gallery entrance they'd used. Row 7. "Can you seal some of these doors?" The tech adept examined the closest doorway. "With time. The locking mechanisms are standard Imperial pattern. I can override them and establish hard-coded lockouts. Start with the far corridor. Work your way around." They organized with the efficiency of people who understood that time was the enemy. Row 7 moved from door to door, interfacing with lock mechanisms and reprogramming them to refuse any input except their own codes. Liz set up a portable harmonic dampener near the broadcasting array, adjusting frequencies to minimize neural stress on the children without fully severing their connections. Dante and Varn's remaining soldiers established defensive positions, covering the unsealed entrances. They worked in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Purposeful rather than tense. Psyker Cole remained in the gallery, wide eyes focused on something beyond normal perception. "They know we are here," the Psyker announced. "The network feels the disruption. They are coming." "How many?" Varn asked. "Many." The first attack came 20 minutes later. Cultists poured from the northern corridor, a tide of bodies driven by something beyond reason. They didn't coordinate, didn't use tactics, just charged with the blind faith of those who believed their god would make them invincible. Varn's soldiers cut them down with disciplined fire. Lace gun bursts and bolt rounds found targets with mechanical precision. The cultists fell, but more kept coming, climbing over their own dead to reach the defenders. Dante held the eastern entrance alone, his blade working in rhythms that looked almost peaceful in their efficiency. A cut here severed a hamstring, dropping the target. A thrust there found a throat. Each motion flowed into the next without pause or hesitation. No wasted movement, no unnecessary violence, just necessary death delivered to those who came to harm the children. A cultist with augmented strength broke through the line, heading for the nearest child chair. Dante intercepted them 3 steps from their target sword, removing both legs at the knees. The cultist collapsed, screaming. Dante silenced them with a single thrust. The wave broke, retreated, regrouped somewhere out of sight to plan a better approach. In the relative quiet that followed, Lise worked on the first child, carefully detaching cables while monitoring vital signs on borrowed medical equipment. The girl's breathing changed, becoming less mechanical, more natural. Her eyes flickered, showing the first signs of awareness. Beneath the fog, row 7 had sealed 3 of the 4 entrances. The northern corridor remained open, but that was by design. Better to have the enemy come from one direction than multiple. Varn checked ammunition counts, redistributed supplies, and updated tactical assessments with the calm of someone who had held impossible positions before. Dante cleaned his blade, then stood at the eastern entrance, watching the corridor beyond, waiting for the next wave. Behind him, 24 children breathed in chairs that had been their cages. One chair sat empty, now its occupant sedated and resting on improvised bedding, while Lys began work on the second victim. The hymn continued overhead, singing through pipes and speakers. But here in this chamber, it had lost its grip. Here someone had drawn a line, and when the next wave came, screaming their devotion to masters that fed on suffering, they would learn what happened when that line was defended by someone who had already seen hell and decided some things were worth fighting for anyway. Not because it was smart, not because it was tactical, because it was right. And sometimes in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war that had to be enough. The Medici team arrived 4 hours after the first cultist attack. They came with stretchers, sedatives, and the grim professionalism of people who had learned not to ask questions when an inquisitor summoned them into active combat zones. Lise coordinated the extractions with Row 7, each child disconnected in careful sequence, while Medici personnel monitored for shock or seizure. 13 had been freed so far. 11 remained. Dante maintained his position at the northern entrance, watching the corridor where the last attack had come from. The cultists had retreated after their second wave broke against coordinated fire, but he could hear them out there, chanting, preparing something worse. Varn stood beside him, reloading her weapon with methodical precision. "They're taking too long," she said. "Can't rush it without killing the kids. We may not have a choice." She snapped the magazine home. Psyker Cole reports increasing warp resonance. Something is building. Dante didn't respond, just kept watching the shadows at the corridor's end. Behind them, Lise worked on the 14th child, a boy whose eyes had started to track movement again once the cables were removed. He whimpered when she touched his arm, but he was alive, aware, more than he'd been an hour ago. Row 7 approached from the broadcasting array, moving with the jerky urgency of someone who discovered something they wished they hadn't. "Inquisitor?" The tech adept's organic eye was wide. "You need to see this." Varn turned. "Report." "The broadcast network. I've been analyzing its pattern structure while Sister Lise handled extractions." Row 7 pulled up multiple data streams on their slate. "The HIM isn't just corrupting people, it's mapping them, recording behavioral data, combat responses, tactical patterns." "Explain relevance." "It's building a profile." The tech adept's mechanical eye clicked through spectrums highlighting sections of code. Specifically, one profile, aggregated from observations of a single target's actions across multiple encounters. Lise looked up from her work comprehension dawning across her features like a sunrise before an execution. "They're watching someone," she said. "Learning from them, building a template." "Who?" Varn's tone had gone flat. "Dangerous." Row 7 turned the data slate toward Dante. "Him." The silence that followed had weight, substance. Like the moment before a structure collapsed under stresses it was never designed to bear. Dante walked over, looked at the slate, saw his own movements rendered in data streams, combat patterns analyzed, decision trees mapped, every fight since he'd arrived cataloged and processed. "What are they building?" he asked. Row 7 pulled up another file, this one marked with symbols that made Lise physically flinch. A warp construct, non-aligned with the major powers but utilizing similar methodologies. They're creating an entity that mimics your appearance, your capabilities, your behavioral patterns, fed by collective belief channeled through the broadcast network. A doppelganger. More than that. Lise had moved closer, reading over Row 7's shoulder. A saint, an icon. They're not just copying you. They're making you into something the people here can worship. Varn's hand went to her weapon, stayed there. "Angelus Ruber," she said quietly. "The Red Angel. We've seen the name in captured cult documentation. We assumed it was code for their patron entity. It is." Row 7 highlighted another section. "But the patron isn't what they're summoning. It's what they're creating, using Dante as the template and the cathedral's population as the power source." Dante stared at the data, watching his own fights play out in analyzed segments. Every demon he'd killed, every node he'd destroyed, every civilian he'd saved, all of it recorded, studied, fed into an algorithm designed to birth something wearing his face. When? He asked. The construct is already partially manifested. Liz pulled up sensor readings from the cathedral district. Each time you fight, each time people see you killing demons and saving lives, their belief feeds into it. The cult shaped that belief through the broadcasts, directing it toward their creation. Where is it? Unknown. But based on the resonance patterns, she traced lines on her schematic. Somewhere central, somewhere with high population density and architectural acoustics suitable for mass manifestation. The main cathedral, Varn said. The core sanctuary where this started. Dante looked at the children still strapped in their chairs, then at the medica personnel working to free them. We can't leave them. No. Varn's tone carried the weight of a decision made. But we can divide our forces. I'll remain here with half the squad and the medici team. You, Sister Liz, and Row 7 will proceed to the cathedral with the others. That's not enough protection if they attack in force. It will have to be. She met his eyes. Because if that construct completes its manifestation, this entire hive becomes a warp beacon. And then everyone dies anyway. Psyker Cole drifted down from the gallery, white eyes finding Dante with uncomfortable precision. The angel dreams of you, the Psyker whispered. It sees through eyes you gave it. It moves with grace you taught it. And when it wakes fully, it will believe it is you. Righteous, pure, sent to cleanse the unworthy. But it's not me. No. It is what the warp makes of belief. And belief filtered through corruption becomes something hungry. Something that will kill in your name and call it salvation. Dante absorbed this with the expression of someone calculating how badly they'd been played. The cult hadn't pulled him here by accident. The resonance coordinate wasn't random. They'd been fishing for something specific, and he'd walked right into the net. They used the warp anchor scar, he said, remembering the spiral burn on his chest. That's how they locked on to me specifically. Likely. Row 7 consulted their records. Demonic essence leaves resonances. Someone with your particular heritage would stand out to warp-based detection systems. So this whole thing, the choir beasts, the possessed civilians bringing me here, all set up. Not entirely. Lise checked another data stream. The corruption is real. The deaths are real. But they've been steering you towards specific encounters, making sure you're seen, making sure your actions create the narrative they need. What narrative? The demon hunter who becomes the demon. Liz's voice was quiet. Or rather, the demon hunter who becomes the angel. Same energy, different interpretation. The warp doesn't care about your intentions, only about the shape belief takes when it flows through you. Varn organized her remaining soldiers, issuing orders with brisk efficiency. Epsilon 1 and Epsilon 3 would accompany Dante's group to the cathedral. The others would hold this position and ensure the children's evacuation. As preparations concluded, one of the medici approached Dante. An older woman with augmented eyes and surgical scars crossing her hands. The boy, she said. The 14th extraction. He keeps saying something. Asked to tell you. What? Red Angel, coming. Save us all. The medici's expression was carefully neutral. The broadcast has been conditioning them. When they see you, they don't see a man. They see deliverance incarnate. Dante looked past her to where the boy sat wrapped in thermal blankets, staring at him with eyes that held something between hope and worship. Tell him I'm just someone who kills demons, Dante said. I did. He smiled and said that's what angels do. The medici walked away, leaving Dante with that particular piece of irony. Liz gathered her equipment, checking charge levels on her portable dampener and verifying data integrity on her recordings. Row 7 performed similar preparations, their mechanical components clicking softly as they ran diagnostic subroutines. Varn approached Dante one final time before departure. The construct will look like you, move like you, possibly even think it is you, at least initially. Can I kill it? Unknown. Warp entities are difficult to permanently destroy without specialized weapons or rituals. But you can disrupt it, sever its connection to the belief feeding it. How? By making the people stop believing in the Red Angel. Show them something that breaks the narrative the cult has built. Dante considered this. And if that doesn't work? Varn's hand settled on her weapon. Then I execute Protocol Terminus and we burn the cathedral district to bedrock. Everyone inside dies, but the warp construct loses its anchor and dissipates. That's not happening. It may not be your choice. She studied him with those executioner's eyes. You understand what you represent now. A weapon that can be turned against the Imperium simply by existing and doing what you do naturally. That makes you either an asset to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. Which am I? That depends on the next few hours. They moved out, leaving Varn and her soldiers to guard the remaining children. The corridors leading back toward the cathedral district were empty, the cultists having withdrawn to more defensible positions, or to prepare for the manifestation of their creation. Liz walked beside Dante, her usual clinical detachment, replaced by something approaching concern. When we reach the cathedral, she said, the construct may already be partially physical, manifested enough to interact with the material world. What should I expect? A mirror, but not a reflection. More like a photograph of you taken through broken glass and reassembled by people who've never seen the original. She paused. It will believe it's righteous. That's the dangerous part. Warp entities shaped by belief often embody the simplified narratives people create. All your demon hunting drive, none of your restraint. All your power, none of your judgment. A monster wearing my face? A saint wearing your face? Which is somehow worse. They ascended through the underhive levels, retracing the path that had brought them down. The hymn grew stronger as they climbed, its rhythm matching Dante's pulse in a way that felt invasive. Wrong. Row 7 monitored warp resonance levels, their mechanical eye flashing warnings with increasing frequency. Manifestation approaching critical threshold, the tech adept reported. Estimate 12 to 15 minutes until full physical coherence. Can we disrupt it before then? Dante asked. Possibly. If we can access the cathedral's central broadcasting array and introduce a counter-harmonic strong enough to break the resonance pattern. Like what Liz did in the factory. Larger scale, more precise timing, and significantly more dangerous. Row 7's organic eye found his. The construct will defend its anchor points. It knows on some level that its existence depends on the broadcast continuing. They emerged into the cathedral district through a maintenance access normally reserved for servitor crews. The streets were empty, which was wrong. This time of cycle should have shown some activity, even in a hive plagued by possession. Instead, silence. And in that silence, the hymn. Liz checked her instruments, then pointed toward the main cathedral spire rising in the distance. There. The resonance is centered there, and something else. Heat bloom, massive energy expenditure. The manifestation, Dante said. Yes. They approached the cathedral's main entrance. The doors stood open, which was also wrong. Inviting, like a mouth waiting to swallow. Inside the sanctuary was packed. Thousands of people knelt in perfect rows, heads, bowed mouths, moving in synchronized prayer. Their voices merged with the broadcast, amplifying it, feeding it back into the network in a loop that grew stronger with each iteration. And at the altar bathed in light that came from no visible source, it stood. Dante saw himself. Or rather saw what he might look like if stripped of doubt, hesitation, and the weight of experience. The figure wore a coat of perfect crimson, untouched by blood or wear. Its white hair caught the light like a halo. Its sword gleamed with edges that had never known the resistance of actual flesh. When it turned toward the entrance, its smile held nothing but serene confidence. Brothers and sisters. It said its voice, Dante's voice, but purified into something meant for hymns rather than bars. The unclean have come to test our faith. But faith is armor. Faith is strength. The congregation rose as one turning to face the interlopers. Their eyes held no recognition, no fear, only the calm certainty of people who had found something worth dying for. The red angel spread its arms wide, and the light around it intensified. Let us show them the Emperor's mercy. Dante looked at his reflection, his parody, his weaponized myth, and understood exactly how badly he'd been played. Not just pulled into a trap, turned into one. The congregation moved with coordinated purpose, flowing down the aisles like water finding its level. Thousands of people, each wearing the same expression of serene certainty. They didn't rush, didn't shout, just advanced with the patient inevitability of a tide coming in. Dante's first instinct was to retreat, regroup, find a tactical advantage. But the red angel stood at the altar bathed in light that came from belief made manifest, and retreating meant letting it consolidate. Lys grabbed his arm. The broadcasting array. Upper gallery behind the organ pipes. If I can reach it, go. Dante drew both guns. Row 7, go with her. Epsilon 1, Epsilon 3 provide escort. The two soldiers moved to flank Lys and the tech adept as they headed for the stairs leading to the gallery. The congregation shifted to intercept, but Dante stepped into their path. You want faith? Here's mine. He opened fire. Not into the crowd, into the floor ahead of them, the walls, the decorative columns. Shots placed to shatter stone and create barriers, forcing the advancing believers to climb over rubble or detour around obstacles, slowing them without killing them. The red angel watched this with its perfect smile. Violence against the faithful. How predictable. Its voice carried through the sanctuary without strain, resonating in a way that made the words feel important. True. But they do not fear your weapons, demon. They have found something worth dying for. Yeah, Dante vaulted over a pew, putting more distance between himself and the advancing crowd. What's that? Salvation through cleansing. The Emperor's mercy delivered by his chosen instrument. The red angel descended from the altar, each step precise and choreographed. Me. Dante studied his reflection as it approached. The coat was wrong, too clean. The sword gleamed like it had never tasted blood. Even the way it moved was wrong, all confidence, without the weight of experience to balance it. You're not me. I am what you should be, what you could become if you surrendered to purpose. The red angel's smile never wavered. A weapon without doubt, a blade without hesitation, perfect in my duty. That's not what I am. No, you are flawed, compromised by mercy and restraint. It drew its sword, the motion fluid and beautiful, and completely lacking the casual economy that came from years of actual combat. But that ends now. Your example has served its purpose. Now only the icon remains. The Red Angel attacked, fast, incredibly fast. Each strike came from perfect angles, textbook form, executed with inhuman precision. Dante blocked, parried, gave ground as he assessed the threat, strong, skilled, but fighting like someone who'd learned from watching rather than doing. Each combination followed logical patterns, predictable sequences that any experienced fighter could read. Dante waited for an overextension, then countered. His blade found the Red Angel's shoulder, cutting through the perfect red coat to reveal light, pure light bleeding from the wound, instead of blood. The Red Angel didn't react to the injury, just continued its assault, the wound already sealing. You cannot kill what was never alive, it said. I am belief made manifest, faith given form. As long as they worship, I endure. Behind them, the congregation had bypassed Dante's obstacles and were climbing into the gallery, where Lys worked frantically at the broadcasting controls. Row 7 had erected a makeshift barricade using organ pipes and shattered pews, but it wouldn't hold long. Epsilon 1 fired over the barricade shots, placed to wound rather than kill. Believers fell back, clutching injured limbs, only to be replaced by more pressing forward. Lys's voice cut through the chaos, amplified through the cathedral's speakers. I need 2 minutes for the counter-harmonic to compile. The anti-canticle has to match exact inverse frequencies, or it won't disrupt the resonance pattern. 2 minutes. With a warp construct that couldn't be killed, and an army of believers willing to die to protect it. Dante changed tactics, stopped trying to damage the Red Angel, and started focusing on separation. Keep it away from the crowd feeding it. Cut the line between icon and worshippers. He drove forward, forcing the Red Angel back toward the altar and away from the congregation. It came willingly, matching his aggression with perfect counters that spoke of observed skill, without earned wisdom. You fight well, the Red Angel said, for a demon. I'm not a demon. Then what are you? It executed a flawless, disarming technique one Dante had used 100 times before. He twisted away from it, having seen it coming 3 moves earlier. I'm just someone who kills demons. That's it. That's the whole job description. And you excel at it, which is precisely why you make such an excellent template. The Red Angel pressed its advantage, driving Dante back across the sanctuary floor. Your skill, your determination, your absolute conviction in the righteousness of demon hunting, all refined and purified for the Emperor's service. The Emperor didn't ask for this. The Emperor doesn't need to ask. His servants act in his name. The Red Angel's smile widened. As do I. As will they. All cleansed by holy fire. All saved through righteous slaughter. In the gallery, Lys typed commands with shaking hands, while Row 7 diverted power from auxiliary systems into the broadcasting array. The tech adept's mechanical eye tracked the compilation progress, calculating probabilities and offering prayers to machine spirits in equal measure. 90 seconds, Row 7 called out. The barricade collapsed. Believers poured through, reaching for Lys with hands that wanted to touch, to hold, to stop her from interfering with their salvation. Epsilon 3 stepped into their path, using his armored bulk as a wall. I don't want to hurt you. Please just stop. They didn't stop. Just pressed forward with serene smiles and empty eyes, trying to pull him down through sheer weight of numbers. Epsilon 1 grabbed Liz, physically carrying her to a higher position on the organ's frame, while Row 7 followed, using their mechanical limbs to climb where human believers couldn't easily reach. Below, Dante fought his own reflection with the growing understanding that winning this fight wouldn't matter if Liz couldn't finish her work. The Red Angel would just keep regenerating, keep fighting, sustained by the belief pouring into it from thousands of faithful minds. "You cannot win," the Red Angel said, reading his thoughts in his face the way a mirror reflects an expression. "Every move you make I know before you make it. Every tactic you employ I have already observed and countered. I am you perfected." "No." Dante caught the Red Angel's blade between his gun and sword, locking them in a momentary stalemate. "You're me simplified, turned into a story people can worship. And stories don't account for all the messy parts." He headbutted the Red Angel, hard, no style, no technique. Just a brutal, practical strike that no one would ever call elegant. The warp construct staggered, surprised by the move, because Dante had never used it in any fight the cult had observed. It was cheap, dirty. The kind of thing you did in alleys when things went wrong, not in dramatic duels that would make good mythology. Dante followed up with a gunshot to the Red Angel's knee, another move that looked terrible but worked beautifully. The construct's perfect form buckled, and Dante used the opening to drive it back further from the crowd. 60 seconds. Row 7 reported, voice distorted by speakers and distance. The believers in the gallery had surrounded Epsilon 3. He was still standing still, trying not to hurt them, but they were pulling him down through sheer mass. His armor could withstand it, but the humans would break themselves against him before they gave up. Liz finished the compilation, her fingers flying across controls while balanced on the organ's narrow frame. "Anti-canticle ready. Row 7, I need you to trigger the noise cage on my mark." The tech adept clambered to a console jury-rigged from salvaged cathedral equipment and their own tools. "Ready. But this will be unpleasant. The harmonic disruption operates at frequencies damaging to organic hearing." "Do it anyway." Liz looked down at the sanctuary, at the thousands of believers, at Dante fighting his own weaponized myth. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. The world shattered into sound. Not music, not him. Pure anti-harmonic resonance, designed to destroy the patterns the broadcast had built. It hit the cathedral like a physical wave, disrupting the carefully constructed frequencies that had been weaving belief into reality. Every bell in the spire tolled discordantly. Every pipe in the organ shrieked. Every speaker erupted with noise that crashed against eardrums and made teeth ache and turned the air itself into something thick and resistant. The congregation stopped advancing, stopped moving, just stood frozen as the anti-canticle tore through the hymn that had been guiding them, leaving them suddenly alone in their own heads for the first time in days. Some collapsed, some screamed. Some just stood there, tears streaming down faces twisted in confused grief. And the Red Angel flickered. The light around it dimmed. Its perfect features wavered like an image reflected in disturbed water. The sword in its hand lost coherence, becoming translucent. "No." For the first time, its voice carried something other than serene confidence. "No. They believe. They must believe. I am their salvation." "You're a story," Dante said, "and stories end." He drove his blade through the Red Angel's chest, not aiming for organs it didn't have, but for the core where belief had condensed into pseudo-matter. The construct's substance resisted, then parted around the steel. The Red Angel looked down at the blade, then up at Dante. Its perfect smile cracked, revealing the void beneath. I was supposed to save them. They don't need you. Dante twisted the blade. They never did. The red angel shattered like stained glass, fragments of light dispersing into nothing. Where it had stood, only air remained, and the fading echo of belief finding no form to inhabit. The anti-canticle continued for another 30 seconds, ensuring the broadcast network's destruction was complete. Then Lys shut it down, letting silence rush back into the cathedral like water into a vacuum. Dante stood at the altar breathing hard, his sword still raised where the red angel had been. Around him, thousands of believers were waking up, coming back to themselves, remembering what they'd done, what they'd believed, what they'd been willing to die for. The horror on their faces was worse than any monster he'd ever fought. Lys descended from the gallery, supported by Row 7. Epsilon 1 and Epsilon 3 were helping believers who'd collapsed, checking them for injuries, offering water to those whose throats were raw from chanting. Varn's voice crackled through the vox bead in Dante's ear. Report. Construct destroyed. Broadcast network disabled. Civilians are alive. A pause. Then, acceptable outcome. Return to extraction point. Dante looked around the cathedral, at the people sitting in pews, crying or staring at nothing or holding each other, at the children's chairs, empty in the chamber below, at the aftermath of salvation delivered through violence because there'd been no gentler option. Yeah, he said quietly. Acceptable. He sheathed his blade and started walking toward the exit. Lys fell into step beside him, Row 7 following with their usual mechanical gait. None of them spoke. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound hollow against what they'd just prevented. Behind them, the cathedral stood silent for the first time in days. The bells no longer tolled. The hymn no longer echoed through stone and pipe. Vespera 9 had been saved. And somehow, that felt like the saddest victory Dante could remember. 3 days after the cathedral fell silent, Vespera 9 counted its dead. 17,342 casualties directly attributable to the broadcast network. Another 4,000 presumed dead in the underhive sections that had collapsed during the fighting. 600 children recovered from various relic factories across the hive, of which 412 were expected to survive extraction. Dante read the numbers on Varn's data slate while sitting in what had once been the cathedral's administrative wing. The Inquisitor had commandeered it as a temporary command post, turning devotional spaces into interrogation rooms and strategic planning centers. Could have been worse, he said, handing the slate back. Could have been better. Varn accepted it without looking at the numbers. She'd already memorized them. If we'd acted 3 days earlier, if we'd burned the cathedral district when I first recommended it, then you'd have killed everyone anyway. Just faster. Cleaner. More certain. She set the slate down, fingers drumming once against its edge. A rare tell of tension. No risk of warp construct manifestation. No possibility of cult resurgence. Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her. 3 days of minimal sleep had added new lines around her eyes, but her spine remained parade ground straight. Duty incarnate even when exhausted. But you didn't burn it, he said. No. I listened to an anomalous entity with demonic heritage and allowed sentiment to override tactical necessity. Her tone was flat, clinical, which is precisely what I'll report to my superiors. They'll love that. They'll categorize me as compromised and assign oversight. She met his gaze. But the hive survived. The construct was eliminated. And you remain. That last word carried weight. Dante waited. Varn pulled another slate from her desk, this one sealed with inquisitorial symbols. Official designation, anomalous entity Dante. Classification, warp-adjacent, non-aligned. Threat assessment, variable. Variable's generous. It's accurate. She broke the seal, revealing a document dense with formal language and official stamps. You demonstrated capability for extreme violence, which makes you dangerous. You also demonstrated restraint when violence would have been easier, which makes you unpredictable. That a compliment? It's an observation. She scrolled through sections highlighting passages. Per protocol, terminus entities exhibiting your threat profile should be either recruited as Imperial assets or terminated to prevent exploitation by enemy forces. Dante's hand drifted toward his sword, not threatening, just ready. Varn noticed. I'm not recruiting you, and I'm not terminating you. What are you doing? She closed the slate. Making a decision I'll spend years justifying, possibly to a tribunal. The silence that followed was interrupted by a knock. Liz entered, carrying equipment wrapped in protective cloth. Behind her, Row 7 navigated the doorway, with care their augmented limbs clicking softly against the floor. You sent for us? Liz asked. Show him. Varn gestured to Dante. Liz unwrapped the bundle, revealing a device cobbled together from cathedral components and Mechanicus technology. It looked like something that had been assembled by talented scavengers rather than proper engineers. Modified frequency tuner, Row 7 explained, mechanical eye focusing on Dante. Based on the principles we used for the anti-canticle but inverse application. Instead of disrupting warp resonance, it amplifies existing dimensional markers. Dante looked at the device, then at Varn. You're helping me leave. I'm resolving a problem. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the cathedral district. Smoke still rose from several buildings. Your presence creates theological complications. The people who saw you fighting demons want to make you a saint. The people who know what you are want you dead. Both factions are problematic. So you're kicking me out. I'm providing you the means to return home, which is what you wanted anyway. She didn't turn from the window. The warp anchor scar on your chest maintains a connection to your point of origin. Weak but persistent. Liz and Row 7 believe they can reverse the resonance that pulled you here. Liz set the tuner on the desk. The theory is sound. The broadcast network used your scar as a targeting beacon. If we can generate the inverse harmonic and sync it with the remaining echo of the original summoning, I might get pulled back the same way I got pulled here, Dante finished. Possibly. Row 7's organic eye met his. The calculations involve significant uncertainty. You might arrive displaced in time or space. You might not arrive at all. But I definitely can't stay here. You can. Varn finally turned from the window. I could file paperwork designating you an Imperial asset. Assign you to demon hunting operations across the sector. You'd be useful, effective, probably save millions of lives. But you'd eventually compromise someone else the way you compromised me. Make them question whether the Emperor's mercy requires actual mercy. Whether serving humanity means serving human beings. She picked up the sealed report. The Imperium doesn't need more questions. It needs certainty, obedience, faith in the system. And I'm bad for faith. You're complicated for faith, which is worse. Dante stood, walking to where Liz had placed the tuner. The device was crude but purposeful, built with a kind of pragmatic desperation that characterized everything he'd seen on this world. Make it work, because it has to work, not because it's perfect. When? He asked. Tonight, Lace said. The warp tides are favorable, and the longer we wait, the more the cathedral's population will solidify their narratives about you. Some already call you the Red Angel, despite our efforts at correction. The name stuck. Names are power here. Row 7 adjusted a component on the tuner, especially names connected to acts witnessed by thousands. Better you leave before the name becomes stronger than the reality. Varn returned to her desk, pulling out a small case. One condition. Dante raised an eyebrow. Take this. She opened the case, revealing a data crystal wrapped in preservation fields. Everything that happened here, full records, sensor logs, tactical assessments, cultural analysis, my report. Why? Because if you encounter another situation like this, you'll know what you're walking into. She closed the case, held it out. And because someone should remember Vespera 9 as more than a casualty statistic. Dante accepted the case. Your superiors won't like you giving me classified information. They already won't like most of what I'm reporting. Adding one more infraction barely registers. Something that might have been a smile flickered across her features there and gone like heat lightning. Considerate payment for services rendered. I thought you didn't pay me. I don't. This is a gift. There's a difference. The extraction point was the same chamber where Dante had first arrived, now cleared of debris and retrofitted with Lisa's equipment. The resonance coordinate runes still marked the floor, though someone had tried to scrub them away. Warp corruption didn't clean easily. Varn's soldiers had established a perimeter, keeping the curious at a distance. Word had spread that something was happening, but the Inquisition's presence ensured no one interfered. Dante stood at the center of the rune circle while Lys made final adjustments to the tuner. Row 7 calibrated sensors monitoring the warp anchor scar's resonance patterns. The anti-canticle will create a directional pull, Lys explained, hands moving across controls. Your scar should respond to the inverse frequency and guide you back along the path you came through. Should. Theory, Row 7 corrected. We've never attempted this before. The probability of success is uncertain. Better than staying here and becoming a theological problem. Varn watched from the gallery, her face expressionless in the way that meant she was feeling too much to show any of it. Psyker Cole drifted beside her, white eyes tracking patterns invisible to normal sight. The demon hunter departs, the Psyker whispered. But the memory remains, carved in stone and belief. They will tell stories of the Red Angel for generations. Let them tell stories, Varn said, as long as the stories don't create another warp construct. Stories always create something. That is their nature. Below, Liz stepped back from the tuner. Ready? Activating on your mark. Dante checked his weapons one last time. Reloaded. Sheathed his blade. The coat was heavier now, soaked with blood and oil that would never fully wash out. New weight added to old stains. Do it, he said. The tuner hummed to life, its frequency building in opposition to the hymn that had pulled him here. The air pressure dropped. The warp anchor scar on Dante's chest burned cold, responding to the resonance with recognition it shouldn't have possessed. Reality cracked. Not violently, not explosively, just a clean separation like fabric tearing along a seam. Through the gap, Dante glimpsed something familiar. Wood floors, cracked plaster, a neon sign flickering with letters that spelled out, "Devil May Cry." Home. The pull was immediate and irresistible, yanking him toward the opening. But different from the arrival. This time he was going with it, instead of against it, riding the current instead of drowning in it. Varn stepped to the gallery railing, looking down at him one final time. "If you remember one thing about the Imperium," she called out, her voice cutting through the dimensional distortion. "Remember this? We do what's necessary because someone must. But necessary isn't the same as right." Dante met her eyes. "What's the difference? You showed me, in that factory with those children." She paused. "Try not to forget it yourself." The tear widened. The pull intensified. Dante felt himself coming apart at the edges, dissolving into the space between worlds. "Hey," he said, and Varn's focus sharpened. "Thanks for not shooting me. Don't thank me yet. I'm still writing the report that might get you hunted across dimensions. Wouldn't be the first time." Then he was gone, pulled through the gap like water through a drain. The tear collapsed behind him, sealing with a sound like thunder played backwards. Silence rushed in to fill the void, heavy with absence. Liz powered down the tuner, hands shaking slightly. Row 7 recorded final readings with mechanical precision, but their organic eye was closed. Varn remained at the railing, staring at the empty space where Dante had stood. "Will he make it?" Lyce asked quietly. "Unknown." Varn turned away, resuming the expressionless mask that was her default. "But if he survived here, he can survive anywhere." She walked toward the exit, already composing the report in her head. Anomalous entity encountered. Temporary alliance formed. Warp construct neutralized. Entity departed through dimensional egress. No ongoing threat to Imperial stability. Clean, factual, leaving out the parts about compromise and mercy and the way some victories felt like failures. Behind her, Psyker Cole whispered to empty air. "The Red Angel is gone, but the wound he left in the warp remembers. And memory in the Imperium is a kind of existence." Nobody heard. Nobody responded. The Imperium continued its endless war, grinding forward, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant damnation. Vespera 9 rebuilt its cathedral. New bells, new choirs, new hymns that carefully avoided the frequencies that had summoned something they couldn't control. And in a small office on a world very far away, where demons knocked with the sound of breaking glass and bills came due with regularity, Dante hit the floor hard enough to crack wood. He lay there for a moment, staring at a water-stained ceiling he hadn't realized he'd missed. The neon sign outside buzzed with its familiar electrical hum. The air smelled like old pizza and gun oil and none of the thousand things that had characterized Vespera 9. Home. Definitely home. He sat up slowly, checking himself for missing pieces. Everything present and accounted for, though the warp anchor scar on his chest still tingled faintly. A reminder. A souvenir from Hell's corporate cousin. The phone rang. Dante stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Devil May Cry. A nervous voice on the other end. "Is this... do you actually hunt demons? Because I think there's something in my basement and..." "Yeah." Dante looked around his office, at the familiar chaos, at the life he'd walked away from for a few days and returned to find unchanged. "I hunt demons. What's your address?" He wrote it down, hung up, grabbed his coat from where it had fallen. Business as usual. Demons needed killing. Bills needed paying. The world kept turning. But as he walked toward the door, Dante paused, pulled out the data crystal Varn had given him, turned it over in his hand, watching light refract through its facets. Someone should remember Vespera 9 as more than a casualty statistic. He set it on the desk next to the phone and the unpaid bills and all the other debris of a life spent fighting things that shouldn't exist. Maybe later he'd figure out how to access it. Maybe he'd learn something useful about fighting corrupted belief and weaponized faith. Or maybe he'd just remember that even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, someone had chosen not to pull the trigger. Someone had chosen mercy, even when necessity suggested otherwise. Dante stepped out into the familiar street, letting the door swing shut behind him. Somewhere in a reality layered over his own, like oil on water, the warp still held an echo of the Red Angel. A myth made from observation and belief, waiting for enough faith to give it form again. But that was a problem for another day. Today, Dante had demons to hunt. And unlike the Imperium, he could still tell the difference between demons and the people they hid behind.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.